Morning, church. This morning we're going to continue our series on raising whole children in a broken world. We're going to be talking about, in just a moment, the importance of discipline as we raise our children. Before we do that, though, I want to mention that right after the invitation song this morning, we will be taking up our annual contribution for our orphans. This will go to support Orphans Lifeline International. It's hard to imagine, hard to picture children in a situation where they have no extended family. Not only do they don't have a mom and daddy, they don't have a grandma or grandpa, they don't have an aunt or uncle, they don't have anybody to turn to. They're absolutely left alone in this world. And they're looking at either dying or being caught up in some horrible, horrible situation like slavery. Orphans Lifeline International is a group that steps in situations like this around the world and provides care for these children who have nobody and nothing. And it's an incredible privilege, I believe, that we have to be able to support that group and to be able to make a difference in the lives of children who, without what we do and others like us, those children would probably just die. And so it's a wonderful privilege, I believe, a responsibility for us to do what we can to support these orphans. And this is our opportunity as we have annually to do that. And again, we'll take that contribution up right after we offer the invitation song this morning. As we talk about raising whole kids in a broken world, I want us to base our thoughts this morning as we talk about discipline on a passage that's found in the book of Hebrews chapter 12, beginning in verse 5 and reading down through verse 11. It says, "And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we've had earthly fathers who disciplined us and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment of all disciples seems painful rather than pleasant. Of all discipline, seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." Now, I believe the writer here makes some incredibly important observations about how God disciplines us, but he draws on the basis of how we are to discipline our children. And there's a number of principles we could draw from this, but there's three in particular that I would like for us to consider this morning. And the first of these is that a good parent is going to discipline his or her children. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Clearly, the writer of Hebrews perceived that if we love our children, we're going to discipline them, just like because God loves us, he's going to discipline us. Now, three observations that I want to make from this particular point. Number one, I think it's very important to understand that you're called to be a parent, not a friend. Our children will have their circle of friends, and it's nice if you can be friends with your child. But your primary calling in relationship to your children is not to be their friend. They need a mama. They need a daddy. They need guidance in their lives. They need someone who's going to train them up and point them in the right direction. And that's what we're called to do. Now, I'm going to talk in a little bit about respect and about relationships with our kids and the fact that I think that ultimately there can be a friendship that comes from this. But primarily, you are not called to be your kid's friend. You are called to be their parent. You are called to bring discipline, very important discipline, into their lives. You are the authority figure in their lives. As parents, and this is very important, we are loving proxies for the world. We are called to, as we've talked previously, to get our kids ready to live in this world. And to do so in a loving, understanding way, but to prepare them for what's to come. And we fail them if we don't do that. You love your kids. We would die for our children. We would do anything for our kids. I mean, we would. What we need to understand and what you need to never forget is the world doesn't feel that way. The world does not love your kids like you do. And it's important that we, in a loving, safe environment, prepare our children for life. Prepare them for what's to come and discipline them accordingly. Little Timmy has friends over and stays up till 2 o'clock in the morning playing video games. And he's supposed to go to work at 7. And you go in to wake him up. Oh, Mom, please, would you just call the boss and tell him I don't feel well today? How many mamas do that? And that's exactly what they don't need to do. What you need to do is get a bucket of cold water and go pour it on him. And get him out of bed. Because he needs to understand that his employer ain't his mama. And mama and daddy need to teach him about responsibility and about fulfilling responsibility, because the world is not going to understand. If you don't show up for work at 8 o'clock when you're supposed to be at work, and you do that a few times, what's going to happen? Your employer's not going to treat you like mama. Your employer's going to fire you, okay? It's incredibly important that we understand, in the context of loving and caring about our children, that we're not enablers, we're not codependents, we're parents with a responsibility to teach our kids how to be responsible and how to function in a responsible way in this world. That is a tremendously important role that you fulfill. And I hate to use this terminology, but honestly, I think it's very appropriate. We have got to prepare our children for war. And I think I've got a good biblical foundation for that, because you go back and you look at passages like Ephesians chapter 6, where Paul has early in that chapter talked about how we are to train up our children in the way they should go, teach them the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, and then a little bit of what he's going to talk about, putting on spiritual armor, isn't he? And how important that spiritual armor is in the context of what? Living as soldiers. It's your responsibility, my responsibility as parents and grandparents, to prepare our children in a very real sense to go to war, because there's going to be a war for their souls. It's an ongoing war. It's a war over values. It's a war over morals. It's a war over beliefs. It's a war over priorities. It's a war. And we have to do everything we can as parents to prepare our children to fight in that war. And not just to fight in that war, and not just to survive and pray God they'll survive, but to, more than just survive, to thrive in the midst of the spiritual conflict that we face today. And so first of all, a good parent is going to discipline his or her children. It's critical for the sake of our kids that we do that. Secondly, I think it's important to understand that proper discipline is going to produce and enhance respect. Besides this, We have had earthly fathers who disciplined us and we respected them. The writer of Hebrews does not see disciplining and respect as two separate things. He sees them as going together, and I think that is absolutely right. Again, 3 observations about this. Number one, there's a world of difference between thoughtful, loving discipline and punishment. When we talk about, and we've talked about this before, but in the New Testament, when it talks about temptations and trials, remember it's the same word in the Greek. It's context that determines whether someone's going through a temptation or whether they're facing a trial, because the Greek word perosmos is the same word. But there's a world of difference between a temptation and a trial. A temptation is designed to cause you to fail. A trial is designed to cause you to succeed. It's the goal that dictates, in a very real sense, whether it's a temptation or a trial. Discipline and punishment often get confused. And one of the problems, I think, that we face today is that in the past, too many people have been punished. And because they've been punished, they have this really negative attitude toward any kind of parental discipline. And so we find parents today really their hands tied in so many ways they feel like, because any kind of discipline is seen as punishment. And that's wrong-headed. It's not. Okay? Discipline is designed to grow a healthy child. Discipline is necessary to help your daughter, to help your son become what they need to be and what they ought to be. Punishment is because they embarrassed you, they angered you, they upset you, and it happens, and so you punish them because they've angered you or they've embarrassed you or made you uncomfortable or whatever. And there's a world of difference between punishment and discipline. And brothers and sisters, what we're talking about as parents is disciplining, not punishing, disciplining our children. And how incredibly important it is that in a loving, thoughtful context, we do that. Discipline is something that you do not when you're angry, not when you're upset. That's when we punish. Okay, we're angry, we're upset, we punish. No. We discipline thoughtfully. We discipline carefully. We discipline to encourage this child to walk in the way that he or she should go. Proper discipline is always going to be appropriate to the offense. And I think it's incredibly important that we understand that. If we are going to discipline as God would have us to, and not be afraid to do that. Now, let me give you an illustration of what I'm talking about. You've got a 4-year-old boy, and he's got a 2-year-old sister. And they start wrangling over a toy. And the 2-year-old is trying to take it from the 4-year-old. And the 4-year-old gets angry, and he takes that toy, and he whacks his sister over the head with it. Because he's upset with her. And you know what happens. Sister starts crying. She's got a knot on her head. Under those circumstances, what do? You take that 4-year-old boy and you discipline him. You let him know that is completely unacceptable. You're not going to hit your sister. You're not going to hit other people. Do you understand? Now, I realize today that there would be many who would say, and that means that you can't use any kind of physicality with them, because if you do, you're simply responding to violence with violence. I would disagree with that. I'd take that little 4-year-old and swat him a couple of times on the bottom, because minor pain helps to make something stick in your head, doesn't it? And you're not beating the child. You're not torturing the child, but you're disciplining that child because he needs to know you don't do that, ever. Okay? They need to learn that. It's incredibly important. Now, that same 4-year-old boy, a couple of days later, you go to the cookie jar to get out a chocolate chip cookie, and That cookie jar is way down from where it ought to be. And so you go and ask your 4-year-old, who's not supposed to get in the cookie jar because he's not supposed to sneak cookies between meals, have you been in the cookie jar? Why, no, Daddy. I haven't been in the cookie jar. And he's got chocolate all around his mouth and crumbs showing. Okay? Now, are you going to treat that like you did him whacking his sister over the head with a toy? No. Now, does he need to have it driven home to him that he needs to tell the truth, that it's wrong to lie, that telling the truth is very important? Absolutely. Do you need to take him and does there need to be some consequence to this? Does he need to go to his room or sit in a corner or whatever for a while? Absolutely. You need to discipline him. But are you going to discipline him in the same way over that you did over him whacking his sister over the head? No. You see, discipline needs to be appropriate to the situation. But we must discipline. It's incredibly important that our children learn what is acceptable and what is not. Now, respect, I believe, is a foundation upon which love can flourish. And I think it's very important that we understand this. Because a lot of people are afraid to discipline their children because they go, well, if I discipline my kids, they won't like me. Listen, we raised 4. When they were teenagers, there was a considerable period of time when they didn't like me at all. And they didn't like Carol either. Why? Because we told them no. And because we disciplined them. They had a curfew and they came in late, they got grounded. You suppose that made us favorites with them? No. Were there other times when we had to discipline them? Yes, there were. And no, they weren't happy at the time. But now that they're in their 30s and 40s and they look back, they see things considerably different than they did when they were 15 or 16 or 17 years old. And there is a relationship that's been established out of respect that wouldn't have been there otherwise. You do your children no favors if you try to be their buddies and you let them do whatever they want because you don't want them to get angry with you or to not like you. You've got a responsibility to train them up in the way they should go. I always think in terms of back in the war, World War II, when men were sent to basic training. And a lot of times the man who would lead them in combat was the one who trained them in basic training. And he would make their life as difficult as he possibly could and work them and work them and work them and work them and work them. And they would hate him until they got on the battlefield and they found out how important that training was. That he wasn't trying to hurt them, he was trying to keep them alive. He was giving them the ability to survive. And as you go on in life, that's what you begin to see and what you begin to understand. I believe very strongly that we should expect the best from our children. We should also demand of ourselves that we give them the very best we can. It's not fair to expect from them what we don't expect from ourselves. With all 4 of mine, at some point toward the end of their teenage years, I sat down with every one of them separately at different times. And I'll be quite honest with you, I apologize to them for the times that I let them down. I apologize to them for the times when I punished them instead of disciplined them. And I'll quite admit I did. I apologize to them for the times I should have been there and wasn't. I apologize to them for the times that I jumped to conclusions sometimes about things rather than listening more. I wasn't a perfect parent, didn't claim to be. But I wanted them to know that I wanted to be as honest with them as I wanted them to be with me. And every one of those sessions, I can tell you, ended in tears and hugs. And it didn't separate us at all. In fact, I think it tightened our relationship. I think it's very, very important that we be honest with our children, that we be clear about what we expect of them, clear about what we expect of ourselves, and that we hold ourselves to an even higher standard than we hold our children to. And that we recognize we're not always going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. We are. But if our kids know that we're doing the dead level best we can do because we love them and we want what's best for them, I believe that builds a foundation that will ensure a relationship from here on. And thirdly, godly discipline produces good fruit. That's what the writer of Hebrews tells us in verse 11. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. But later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Discipline inherently involves training a child. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it, the writer of Proverbs tells us. But discipline inherently involves training. We train up our children. We teach our children. And self-discipline, I believe, is one of the most important traits that we can teach our children. Look in the New Testament and think about how often the New Testament will talk about self-control. And how incredibly important self-control is in all of our lives. If you encounter people without self-control, you encounter people whose lives are out of control. People who are going to have a very, very difficult time in life if they don't know how to discipline themselves. One of the most important things that you can do as a parent is to teach your children self-discipline. We moved to the farm when I was 11. Immediately, Dad gave all 4 of us kids chores. And until I left home, during school, every morning I got up at 5:30. I did not enjoy getting up at 5:30. But every morning I got up at 5:30 and I went out, and my responsibility in winter, summer didn't make any difference, but in particular in the winter, my responsibility was to get the hay down, feed the cattle, make sure they had water, break the ice on the water if that was necessary, make sure they had adequate water, and milk 2 or 3 cows. 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You don't get a day off. My brother, he took care of the pigs. My sisters took care of the chickens. And we all had those responsibilities. And Dad cut no slack. That's your job. That's what you're going to do. Did I get up every morning and go, Daddy, thank you. Thank you. It's 5 below. The wind's blowing. I am thrilled to be up to my knees in muck out in this corral with these cattle, taking care of them. Boy, thank you, Dad. But I can't tell you how many times since I've said thank you. Because he taught us self-discipline. He taught us to work. And it has paid huge dividends for all 4 of us through the years. When I was preaching at Sunset and teaching some classes at times in the school of preaching, it wouldn't take me very long at all to figure out who probably was going to make it as a preacher and who wasn't. If a guy who's in school can't get his papers done, he's in school and he can't keep up with the work, he's got excuses, but he's just not getting the job done, he'll never make it preaching. Because if you're going to preach, you've got to be self-disciplined. You have to be. You know, I took some courses through Rochester College up in Michigan, back when it was called Michigan Christian College. Took some of them on site, took some of them by correspondence. They kept that program up for just a year or two and they dropped it. The reason they dropped it was because the guys who were participating in it didn't have the self-discipline to finish the course. they wouldn't get the work done. And that's no fun. Carol will tell you, there are many nights old Daniel burned the midnight oil, sometimes up till 2 or 3 in the morning, getting the work done. But my dad taught me, if you've got a responsibility, if you've taken on a job, you get it done. You finish it. And I did. You want to give your kids a gift? You give them the gift of self-discipline. You teach them what it means to tell yourself, I don't want to do it, but it's got to be done, and so I'm going to do it. Make all the difference in the world in their lives. One of the things that concerns me right now about our educational system, particularly on the college level, and there are a number of things that concern me. One of the things that really concerns me right now, and you've heard of them too, is safe spaces. On nearly every college campus now, there is a safe space. And so if you're feeling picked on or insecure, or if somebody's going to come to campus and they're going to make you uncomfortable because they're going to challenge your thinking or whatever, then we've got a room that you can go to, and we'll put teddy bears in there, and we'll put coloring books, and we'll give you a place where you can go and you can listen to quiet music and you can feel safe. I feel like it's betraying our kids. Personal opinion, but I feel like it's betraying our kids. There are no safe spaces in life, are there? Huh? The only safe space, if it exists, is the home. Once you get outside a home, forget safe spaces. They don't exist. How long is somebody going to last if every time they have to work with somebody who gives them a hard time, they're going to run and find a safe space? Because I'll guarantee if you work a job very long, there are going to be people you work with that are going to give you a hard time, aren't they? And they're going to make it difficult, aren't they? And if you don't learn to deal with that, self-discipline, you're going to have a hard time in life. Again, gift your children with self-discipline. It's incredibly important, and here's why. Because who doesn't want their child to live a life full of the peaceful fruit of righteousness? What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful way to live life, in the peaceful fruit of righteousness. But that's not going to come about accidentally. That's going to come about because we have helped to train them up in the way they should go. Because we have diligently tried to show them the way. And we have not shrunk back from the sometimes onerous and difficult and painful and tear-inducing task that is disciplining them. But that discipline is incredibly important. Because God loves you and God loves me, He's going to discipline us. But He's going to do it because He wants us to grow, because He wants us to be His. And as mothers and fathers, we need to discipline our children because we want them to grow. We want them to be successful, physically, spiritually, emotionally, in every way. That's what we desire. That's what we want. And so let's take very seriously the responsibility that's been given to us as parents to discipline our children. This morning, if in your respect for the Father, you're ready to identify Him as your God, ready to identify His Son as your Savior, ready to confess that and put on your Lord in baptism, if we can help you in any way in your walk with Him, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?
There's not a friend like the lowly, just singing, no, not one, no, not one. None else could heal our soul's diseases. No, not one, no, not one. You know Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. no